This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome back to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host. And I'm joined across the desk by the traveling Richard Blackaby.
Good to be with you again, Sam.
Nice for you to be in town. You've got a spell here where you're going to be sitting down and just doing a bunch of writing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Way overdue, I think. You've got projects backed up.
It's been a lot of travel so far this year, so yeah, I'm ready to stay away from the airport for a little while.
You don't love the airport and all the hustle and bustle?
I love what it provides for me, but yeah. No.
Yeah, well, today on the podcast, we want to talk about a specific type of leader. Actually, you are this type of leader, and I myself am also this type of leader.
Whether we want to be or not.
Exactly, and there are probably many others, leaders like this that listen to the podcast, and I think we probably all know one of these leaders. And if you haven't guessed by now, we were talking about fathers.
Yeah, we just came on the heels of Father's Day, and so I thought it wouldn't be I think that would be quite appropriate just to zero in on that. Of course, not all of our listeners are fathers. There's some single guys, and there's women listening as well. But we've all had fathers, and I think a lot of the principles, whether you're a father or a mother, certainly applies. And we've said this often, but whether you lead a Fortune 500 company or you lead a church, or whatever it is you lead, there's certainly no more challenging leadership role that you'll ever have than to be a parent. And I think a lot of us probably heard challenging Father's Day sermons this past Sunday, but I thought maybe just because we are in that season and we're just coming out of that now, that I might just give a few of my own thoughts on fathers as well. And of course, that's the kind of thing that's always difficult to do because, I mean, all three of my kids have access to this podcast and they can hear me wax eloquent about what a good father should be, and they'll be shaking their heads saying, well, he wasn't anything like that. So
I somehow doubt that,
but there's certainly an accountability, and there's certain things that, you know, I feel blessed and our kids and how things have worked out, but still there's a certain humility to say you never really want to hold yourself up as an expert on some things. And
I think it's one of those areas where you do feel awkward if you're like giving advice on this thing, and it's like, well, you know, I feel like it's the most caveated sort of area of advice or leadership.
And I think that I'm pretty well in the clear as far as my kids not ending up in jail or something, but they
well, from here on out, it's on them.
It's on them. I've done what I can do.
You've done the raising part, and the rest is a different season, I guess.
But I think as folks have listened to me, they know that my dad was obviously very, very influential in my life, probably the single greatest influence that affected who I became, and certainly my walk with God. And if you were to ask him, he would say that his father was the greatest influence on him, perhaps the greatest, certainly, man of God that he knew, and my dad knew a lot of them. And yet there are also a lot of people out there that would say that they've been spending most of their adult life trying to overcome the deficiency that they experienced because their dad wasn't what they needed them to be or what God called them to be. And I think that's just increasingly so. I think there's more and more people today that grew up in a home where their dad wasn't even in the home, or that they rarely saw their dad, or maybe never saw their dad. And even if they did see their dad, they probably experienced more cursing than blessing. There's a lot of unblessed people today that never had a dad that just spoke life into them. And so I just think that certainly in this culture, we need to keep being reminded about the role of what a dad should be. And so whether you came from a home in which you were blessed by your father, or maybe you weren't, and you're wounded, you're lacking in some ways because of that, I think we still need to go there, and we need to talk about it. And certainly, as we live out our lives, if you're a man and you're going to be a father at some point, I think you need to don't assume I guess one thing I just say kind of an introduction is that I've known some people who did not have godly fathers that blessed them, and they said, "Boy, I tell you, I am not going to be like my dad. I'm not going to be hurtful the way my dad was."
Mm-hmm.
But what I've seen often is that these same men, they don't know what they don't know, and so they may realize, okay, I don't want to, physically, emotionally harm my children the way the way I experienced it. But the problem is that they never saw the positive things because their dad didn't do those things, and so they don't know what to do.
What does not harming your kids look like?
Yeah, and
Right.
the flip side, your kids need more than to not be harmed. They need to be
Right.
blessed, and if you never experienced a blessing, then you don't know how to do it. You don't know what to do, and so I've known some very well-intentioned people that wanted to be great dads, but they just didn't have any role models to follow. So I'm going to just mention a couple of things, and these are no particular order, I guess, but just some thoughts that I have just from my own experience, what I've seen, and of things that fathers ought to do. And the first one would just be realize that there are eyes upon you all the time. You are leading on stage before an audience, and so if you've got one kid or you've got 10 kids, they're watching you and they're observing and they're filing away and saying, so that's how a man lives his life. That's how a man loves his wife. That's how a man loves God. That's how a man deals with problems, how he apologizes when he's done wrong.
And I'll say that they are little sponges too, because our oldest is only 3, and she'll just regurgitate things, and you're like, where? Like, just some obscure, offhanded thing, and it's like, you remembered that?
Yeah,
like, you picked that up. Like, it's amazing what.
Yeah.
What
and like you watch your 3-year-old little girl play with dolls or something, and the daddy doll, like just listen to how she has that daddy doll, what he says and how he acts and how he treats his family, and you realize, oh, that's her impression at 3 of what a dad does, and it can be quite humbling.
Oh, for sure.
And of course that doesn't just stop when your child is 3, even when they're 18, 20. They're still watching, and now the flip side of that, there's an accountability for sure of that, but there's also a huge opportunity because you are getting to live out your Christian life right in front of an audience, and you're going to you will have perhaps the greatest influence. You and your wife will have the greatest influence of anybody on those lives, the impressions that will be made. And so what an opportunity to demonstrate to them how to live the Christian life, how to love God with all your heart and soul and strength and mind. So just be aware. We forget sometimes, and not only are their eyes on us, their ears are listening to everything that comes out of our mouth. And a second thing that goes right with that is we will also give an account to our kids of how we lived our life. And that has been particularly impressed upon me. And I've thought about this every time there's a story of perhaps a pastor or a leader of some kind that experiences a moral failure. Every time I hear about someone doing that, my first thought is, how did that impact their kids? And if a man commits adultery, and he's got kids, and I always kind of think, particularly of a daughter, how would you look your daughter in the eye and try to explain to her why you were unfaithful to your mother? And that, I tell you what, that just sends shudders down my spine, my soul to think of that. And or in other ways as well, you might have just refused to forgive someone and you became bitter, and every time that person's name came up, you said something bitter about that person, and your kids grew up knowing that. They knew that you hated somebody or you refused to forgive someone, and that you were angry and bitter about how you've been treated, and at the time you just didn't think that much about it, but your kids just kind of filed that away and realized, okay, well, Dad says he loves Jesus, but he's not willing to forgive people the way Jesus told him to, and he doesn't have the joy of Jesus in his life because he's so bitter and angry at how he was treated. And or maybe I've known some pastors who served in the church, but they resented the way the church treated them. They were upset with some church members, and so they badmouthed the church in front of their kids. And then to their bewilderment, their kids grow up and none of them wants to go to church, and certainly none of them wants to be in the ministry. Mm-hmm. And you realize, well, they listened to me badmouth the church continuously, and now there's an accounting to be had, because now I'm reaping what I've sown.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that you were a faithful attender of church, but your attitude towards it gets, that's contagious to the kids.
And, a third thing I would just say, and this is a big one, is just consciously bless your kids. And you know what? It's hard to bless people when you were not blessed yourself. It's hard to give to others what you have not been given yourself. Mm-hmm. And so you may not have been blessed in your home growing up. Your father may never have ever told you that he loves you or that he's proud of you. And so now you don't want to be that kind of father, but you've never seen it done. You don't know how to do it. And I would just say there's lots of ways to bless people, but a couple of things I think that are important is, one, sometimes people just feel like, well, I'll just pronounce things like, you are just so smart, or you are just so handsome, or whatever you want to say to your kids. But typically, I think genuine blessings, they begin by observing things that are real, that are true. Mm-hmm. You can say anything, but sure. But I think the best blessings come from what you've observed. And so you observe someone, maybe you just observe someone that's your kid is thoughtful of his friends. And so you observe that and say, I've just noticed you're a great friend. I'll tell you what, people love being around you because you're just so kind to and thoughtful of others. And, maybe they are really good. I'll tell you something, if you really want to bless someone, though, focus on their character even more than their skills. I mean, you can say, wow, you're the best soccer player on your team, but I don't know that actually is as great of a blessing. I mean, you should be proud of your kids if they succeed in something, but when you tie a blessing to their character, that stays with them forever. They may not always be a good soccer player. They may, move on and quit playing that sport or whatever. But when you tie something to character, then that's something that follows with them the rest of their life. And so whether you observe that they're faithful, it could be just little things like just you've got a child that's just very reliable, that he's always does what he says, he's always on time. It could be that just it's Sunday morning and your 13-year-old son or daughter is ready to go for church on time. They've showered, they've dressed, they've eaten, they've got their Bible, they're ready to go. Don't ever take that for granted. There's lots of parents who struggle with getting their kids out the door, getting them out of bed. So say something about that. Just say, son, I just want you to know I really appreciate the fact you are always ready. You get up, you take care of things. You don't put things off. You don't procrastinate. It's a joy having you as a child. When I know I can rely upon you, but if they go to church, don't take that for granted. Tell them how blessed you feel that your kids go to church with you without complaining, with a good attitude, and just find a way not only to observe what's happening in your kid's life, but then verbalize it. If you don't say it, it doesn't matter that you noticed it. So, tell them specific things that you notice that you just really want to affirm, and especially if it's a result of their character or their walk with God. If you if you ask them to say grace and they pray just a really sweet prayer to God, point that out. Just say, hey, I just want you to know I'm always blessed when I hear you pray. Just you have such a way that you talk with God that it touches my heart every time. And you have no idea the kind of things, what that does. It's just like pouring water onto their soul when you observe something deep about them, not something just surface, but when you say things and it's obvious you've really paid attention to them and you've listened to them, you've watched them, and you've noticed. I think part of being blessed is just being noticed. People see you and they see what you're doing.
Well, and I think, with parenting, I feel like so much of it is, don't do this. No, you can't have that. And stop, hitting whatever. And so it can, I think if you're not careful, it can tend towards all I ever say to my kids is stop it. No, don't.
Right.
And so, being that intentionality about affirming them in what they are doing that is good. Like you make a painting and, if you are kind to your little sister, those sort of things, like affirm that. Don't just be like every time Dad says something, it's like telling me to stop whatever it is I'm doing.
Right.
And, because I feel like that can have certainly a very negative impact.
And you have to do some of that, but just kind of, do the math and figure out if the last 5 things I've said to my kid is all don't, stop doing that. Make sure that you're trying to find things that you can say, keep doing that. That's great. I think so, but like I said, I think the key is go get beyond just performance to character. So like if your child comes home and has all straight A's in their report card, that's fine to say, wow, you're so smart. But if you're not careful, you'll end up just really cultivating kind of a performance culture where every time you get straight A's or I'm the leading hitter on my baseball team, then
Dad loves me when I do well.
But let them know you love them when they are well, for being and for the kind of person they are. And not just simply getting good results, because otherwise that kind of affirmation just seems really completely contingent on their performance, and it can become more of a trap for them, a guilt trip for them instead of that's not a blessing. Then it's just Dad is always proud when I'm better than anybody else on the playing field or in my classroom, but when you notice those subtle things, those character things, those times when they behave like Jesus, that can be even a better blessing. And maybe just one other thing to mention at this point, and that's just pray for them. Pray for your kids, and I don't know of anything more that greater than just interceding with God in their behalf. And I've mentioned this before. I have a prayer journal for my grandkids, but I wish I had done that for my kids. I just didn't really think of it or know about that at the time. I did have a prayer journal where my regular one that I would put prayers in there about my kids, but I wish I'd had a journal that I just had for each of my kids, that I prayed for them and wrote down my prayers and observations that when they were maybe got married or graduated from college or something, that I could have given to them, and they could have seen the prayers that their dad prayed for them. But because a lot of times you're praying for them in your quiet time, but they don't know what you're praying, and they're not there when you're doing that. And
well, that's such a gift to be able to look back on, and you can see that, okay, no, Dad really did care, and this isn't, he's been keeping this for so many years. And
what a treasure house if you could see the prayers your father prayed for you when you were just a baby, before you could even talk. He was already praying for you, pouring his heart out to God on your behalf. What a blessing to be able to see that. And
well, let's maybe take a break here, and we'll have a few more thoughts for dads when we come back.
Hello, I'm Richard Blackaby. I'm the co-author of Experiencing God. And here at the Blackaby Bible Institute, we're offering an online class of Experiencing God that people can take from around the world. No one had any idea back in 1990 when Experiencing God was first published that it would be so life transforming and that people would experience revival. They'd be set free from burdens they'd carried for years. I can't go anywhere in the world without people telling me how this material has changed their life. And so we offer it as the Blackabees, where we have all kinds of video resources, a live stream where you can submit live questions and get answers from myself and others, and just many different resources that will enhance your experience of Experiencing God. So I want to encourage you, if you've never taken the class before, or even if you have, the Blackabee Bible Institute will offer you more resources than you could have gotten anywhere else. And so we look forward to studying with you, and we're praying that it will change your life as you do.
Well, Richard, fathers, it's a mixed bag. People have great experiences with their fathers, and people have horrible experiences with their fathers. But regardless, I think what we're walking through today can be helpful to anyone, whether or not they are a father. Some of these principles obviously apply to mothers and just leaders in general.
Yeah.
But maybe as we come to a close here, we can look at just a few more points we have to help fathers be a blessing.
Yeah. Well, I've looked at 4 so far, and the 5th one would just be seek to understand your child. Some kids are going to take after you. They're going to have a similar temperament as you. And so that will be pretty easy for you to say, why is my son just like me? But one of the things I found was that, some of my kids weren't as much like me. We didn't have the same personality. And so sometimes you can just...
I can't imagine which child was not like you.
You can,
it puzzles me.
Yeah. That's, well, we can talk more about that offline. But what I have come to realize over time is, that can be a source of frustration when they don't just naturally respond to things the way you would have done. But I've come to really appreciate just the diversity of that. And so maybe if you're like an extrovert and you have a child who's an introvert, we've talked about introversion here of late, but don't just say, well, you just need to be more extroverted. Come to really appreciate the beauty of how God designed them to be an introvert. And again, I don't know of many ways where you can be a greater blessing to someone than to seek to truly understand them. To listen to them. Don't just talk to them, but listen to them and ask questions and truly show an interest in the amazing personality that God has developed in them.
Well, like you said earlier, I think half the blessing is being noticed. And so when you take that interest, whether or not, for better or worse, like just having an interest in your kids is a blessing.
And, they're a gift from God. Like God wired them, and it ought to just fascinate you. Mm-hmm. You ought to just have a fascination with how God wired your kids, and to spend your whole life trying to understand them. There's just so many layers to people, and truly wanting to understand as many layers of your kids as possible. And a 6th thing would just be apologize when it's called for. Again, there are lots and lots of people who've never heard their father ever say, I'm sorry, even when they really needed to say that. And I'm not saying that you force it. You do it when it's not necessary. Hopefully you don't ever have to, but I'm suspecting most fathers will.
Yeah.
And just to humble yourself and admit when you're wrong. I don't know. There are some very insecure men out there who, even when they've just blatantly done wrong things, they're just too insecure to have to acknowledge it, to admit it. But if you want your kids to be able to acknowledge their wrongdoing, then they need to see you model that as well. And a 7th thing would just be give your full attention. We've talked about this even recently, but you want to give quantity time to your kids, but certainly you also want to give quality time. And that means that when your kids are talking to you, really discipline yourself to give them your full 100% attention. Don't put your phone down, turn away from the TV, or turn the TV off. If you're watching like a sports game and your kid comes in and obviously has something he really needs to talk to you about, turn the TV off. Like, don't sit there trying to keep up with the score while your son is pouring his heart out to you.
Yeah.
There are moments when you need to just, in every way possible, let your child know you are far more of a priority to me than who ends up winning this game. And so if someone comes, your kid wants to talk to you, just, put the phone down, turn off the TV. Don't try to like keep up with the score while you're also listening to your child tell what a horrible day they had at school that day. They ought to, in every way possible, let them know that they are indeed the single greatest priority in your life at that moment as you're listening to what they have to say. There's just an enormous gift of your attention. And I've just known many a dad that was distracted. They were trying to multitask, and there's just lots of evidence to say it's impossible to multitask. You will be giving your attention to one thing or another, and if you're still trying to keep up with the score or the work you're doing or the email you were just reading, and your child, you're not giving full attention to your child. So, an eighth thing is just watch your words. You can't take your words back. And I've known some fathers who just in frustration or anger, they said something and they got over it. They kind of moved on, but their child never did. And I've told stories before of men that were 65 years old who still were wounded by something that their dad said to them 50 years earlier. If you can imagine, at 15, their dad in anger said something that was so hurtful that now the man's 65 years old and he still gets tears in his eyes when he hears it. And the dad is dead and gone at that point, and his son still feels the wound. The wound is still raw. And so I've just thought to myself, just for heaven's sakes, I know you're frustrated right now. I know your child just did something that really put you over the edge.
Yeah.
But take a deep breath, pray and ask God to give you strength and wisdom. But before you open your mouth, just remember, they will remember what you're about to say for the rest of their life. And so it can be you can forgive, you can show grace, and they'll remember that the rest of their life. Or you can say something that's hurtful just because you're so frustrated, and I mean, there'll be times when you will be frustrated, but just remember, say it in a way that you can live with those words the rest of your life. And then just two last things. A ninth thing is just care enough to correct. There are just some things in your kid's life that may need some correction, and that doesn't always mean you're disciplining them. It just might mean that you just see something in them and that you just feel like you need to encourage them with. You can't just let it go. At this point, it may not be a serious issue in their life, but if left unattended, it could become. And a lot of times we'll have our concerns, but then we just kind of let it go. And then all of a sudden we realize now that it was just a spark. Now it's a raging fire. And I would just kind of counter that a little bit by saying that be careful that that's not what you're doing all the time. There are moments where I think you just do need to step in and catch things early so that they don't become habits and deeply ingrained. But I remember one time my wife Lisa pulling me aside and just saying, Richard, not every conversation you have with our kids has to be a teachable moment. Sometimes just enjoy your kids.
But there's so much for them to learn.
I know. I have so much I need to teach them, in the ways that they should go. But and you should be teaching and you should be correcting when you need to, and you should be blessing. But I suppose one of the things that I learned, and a lot of this came from my wife, was there's a lot of Christian parents who spend an awful lot of time trying to raise their kids, but they're not enjoying their kids. And I think that there are times where you just need to enjoy them. You just need to kick back and just sort of take your parenting hat off for a time and just have fun. Just watch a hockey game together, or go to the amusement park together, or just laugh, just toss a ball around in the backyard for a while. But and sometimes you just there may be things that you'd like to talk about. There's some things you might be a little concerned about, but there's a time for that, and then there's just a time just to enjoy your child. And and for a lot of parents, that would be a primary word I would have for them is, when I know you're trying to raise your child, but when was the last time you just took time to enjoy them and just enjoy them as a gift from God? And then just the last thing I would just say is just speak about God, speak of God to your kids. Let them regularly hear you. And let me just encourage you, there are times where even if you're just saying grace before a meal, that you have an opportunity to just talk to God about your family and asking God to bless your family and protect your family, and for them just to experience His love in their life in the days ahead, and that allows your kids to realize just how very real God is. Sometimes there are parents who kind of make the mistake of thinking, well, if I just drag my kids to church every Sunday, that my kids will all grow up to know that God is real. But that's once a week, and they're hearing it from the pastor, they're hearing it from their Sunday school teacher, but they need to hear it from their dad. They need to know that their dad experiences God as he goes to work during the week, and their dad sitting around the dinner table is reflecting on how he experienced God at work that day and throughout his life, and so when you maybe it's around the dinner table, but you just say, hey, guys, got to tell you about what God did in my life today. Got to tell you what God did at work today. I was on the way home from work, and boy, I tell you what, all of a sudden I just felt like God was just teaching me something. I just wanted to share that with you. I tell you, I don't know how you could be a greater blessing to your kids than to talk about God. And Deuteronomy 6 has a lot to say about that. Just whether you're walking along the way, whether you're sitting at the dinner table, whether it's bedtime, but just regularly bring God up, not to pound them over the head with God, but just because God is such a pivotal part of your daily life that you can't help but talk about Him. And if God is very personal and real in your daily living, then your kids will realize, well, that's how it's supposed to be for me too. God's just supposed to be a part of my life throughout the day. So what a blessing to your kids if they just regularly have memories of hearing Dad talk about what God did in his life. And so there's obviously, we could do another list of 10 and still not cover everything a dad should do with their kids. But but those are at least 10 things I'd say. If you're nailing those and you're giving some attention to those, you're well on your way to being a blessing to your kids. And I'll tell you, I honestly believe that when I see a bunch of pictures in the news of angry people marching and upset and yelling into cameras and hateful and unforgiving and bitter, sometimes I just wonder, these people just look like unblessed people that have never been blessed, never been loved and shown care, and as a result, they're not anchored anywhere, and whatever happens in life just sort of tosses them about. And so I think that in this very troubled, confusing world, one of the best things a dad can do is just be someone who speaks life into their kids, blesses them, anchors them to God, shows them the way, models for them how to conduct themselves in a difficult world. And I just think that of all the ways you'll invest yourself in as a leader, I can't imagine anything more important than doing that.
Absolutely. Well, let's leave it there, and until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.